There are certain moments in life that split everything clean in two: the person you were before and the person you had no choice but to become. I used to believe that surviving those moments was the hardest part. I know better now. Surviving is just the beginning. The real work is deciding what you build on the other side of the wreckage. I was 28 years old, 7 weeks pregnant, and sitting at my mother-in-law's kitchen table when I first understood that the woman across from me had never once seen me as a daughter. She had seen me as an obstacle. She had seen me as a problem that needed a permanent solution. And she had spent 3 years patiently waiting for the right moment to act on that. My name is not important. What matters is the woman I was before that Sunday afternoon quiet. Grateful, eager to belong, and the woman I became because of what happened in the weeks that followed. I am a licensed pharmacist. I have spent the better part of a decade studying what things do to the human body at the molecular level, what heals, what harms, and how thin the line between the two actually is. I tell you my profession not to impress you, but because it is the single most important detail in this entire story. My knowledge of chemistry is what saved my life. It is what saved my daughter's life. And it is ultimately what dismantled everything my mother-in-law had spent years constructing. My husband, Daniel, was the kind of man who genuinely believed his family was exceptional. He had grown up watching his mother, Patricia, orchestrate every room she walked into. And he had mistaken control for strength and manipulation, for love for so long that he no longer knew the difference. He was not a cruel person. He was something almost sadder than cruel. He was completely blind. Patricia had kept him that way on purpose. His sister, my sister-in-law. It was a quieter version of the same thing. She did not lead. She followed. She observed. She reported back. I had never been able to prove it. But I had felt it from the first dinner I attended at their home, that particular sensation of being studied rather than welcomed. Patricia owned a small chain of bakeries across 3 counties. She was well-dressed, well-spoken, and in possession of a charm so polished, it occasionally fooled even me. What she also possessed, though she had managed to keep it hidden from almost everyone who knew her, was a deep and immovable obsession with the estate her late husband had left behind. He had structured his will with what I can only assume was a very specific kind of foresight. The bulk of the inheritance, just over $8 million, was held in trust, releasing in portions tied to family milestones. Marriage had released one portion to Daniel. The birth of a child would release another, significantly larger, portion directly to Daniel and to me jointly. Not to Patricia. Not to the family at large. To Daniel and his spouse together. Patricia had been smiling at me for 3 years while sitting on that information. I discovered I was pregnant on a Thursday morning. I took 3 tests in the pharmacy bathroom before I let myself believe it. I was terrified and overwhelmed and more quietly joyful than I had ever been about anything. I called my own mother first, then my closest friend. And then, because Daniel was traveling for work, and I wanted to hear his voice, I called my husband. He cried. I cried. It was one of the most genuinely beautiful conversations of my marriage. What I did not do, and I want to be very clear about this, was call Patricia. She found out anyway. I do not know how. I have my suspicions about a conversation Daniel had with his sister before he had the chance to ask her to keep quiet. What I know is that by Saturday, Patricia knew. And by Sunday, she had invited us to brunch. I want you to understand what it felt like to sit in that kitchen. Patricia had made everything from scratch pastries from one of her bakeries. A fruit arrangement. Fresh squeezed juice. Coffee. And a separate pitcher of what she called her special herbal tea blend that she told me was excellent for early pregnancy. Calming, she said. Good for the nausea, she said. She had done her research. She told me. Because she was so happy, so genuinely overjoyed, that she wanted to do everything right this time. I am a pharmacist. I notice things most people do not notice. The color of that tea was slightly off. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would register for someone who had not spent years identifying the visual properties of plant-based compounds. But it registered for me. There was a particular greenish undertone that did not match chamomile or ginger or any of the standard pregnancy-safe herbs. Patricia claimed it contained. I held the cup. I smiled. I thanked her. And I did not drink a single drop. I asked to use the restroom. While I was upstairs, I slipped back into the hallway and stood completely still for approximately 45 seconds. Listening. I heard Patricia tell Daniel that I seemed tired. That pregnancy suited me. That she was so pleased. She sounded like a woman performing happiness for an audience she trusted completely. She did not sound like a woman who had just been told her son was going to be a father. There was no spontaneous joy in it. There was orchestration. I came back downstairs. I complimented the pastries. I kept the teacup near my hand without ever raising it to my lips. I left with my husband an hour later and drove home in almost complete silence. That night, after Daniel fell asleep, I took a small sample of the tea I had managed to pour into a travel container in my bag. I am a pharmacist. I carry small containers and I labeled it with the date and time and Patricia's name. I placed it in the back of the refrigerator behind a container of leftover soup. And then I sat at the kitchen table for a long time thinking about what I actually believed had just happened to me. I did not go to Daniel with suspicion. I want to address this directly because I know it is the first question most people ask. Why didn't you tell your husband? The answer is that I had 3 years of evidence showing me exactly what would happen if I did. Daniel would call his mother. Patricia would be devastated. There would be tears and a conversation and a reconciliation I was not present for. And Daniel would come home and tell me gently that I had misunderstood. That his mother would never. That I needed to be more charitable toward her. I had seen this pattern play out over smaller things. A comment about my career. A suggestion about where we should live. A question about whether I was sure I wanted children so soon. Every concern I raised about Patricia was absorbed by Daniel and returned to me softened. Redirected. Diffused. He was not doing it maliciously. He had been trained to do it his entire life, and he could not see the training from inside it. So instead of telling Daniel, I called in a favor. I have a colleague, someone I have worked with for 6 years, whose husband runs a toxicology lab. I will not name them here because their privacy matters to me. What I will tell you is that within 4 days, I had a preliminary analysis of the tea sample sitting in my email inbox. What it showed was a concentration of pennyroyal extract significant enough to be considered dangerous. Pennyroyal has been used historically as an abortifacient. It causes uterine contractions. In sufficient quantities, it is capable of terminating a pregnancy. And it has also been known to cause serious damage to the person who ingests it. I sat with that report for a very long time. I want to describe the specific quality of that moment, because I think it is important. There was no dramatic breakdown. There were no tears. There was a strange, cold clarity that moved through me like water finding level. And I realized that every uneasy instinct I had ever suppressed in that woman's presence had been telling me the truth the entire time. I was not oversensitive. I was not paranoid. I was not failing to appreciate my family. I had been in proximity to someone genuinely dangerous. And the only reason I was sitting at my kitchen table, with my pregnancy intact, was that I had happened to notice a color that was slightly wrong. I did not confront Patricia. I did not tell Daniel. I took the report and I placed it in a fireproof box I keep in my home office. And I started building a record. I want to explain something about the way I approached the next several weeks, because I have been asked about it many times since. People wonder why I did not go immediately to the police. The answer is that I am a woman who has watched enough of this world operate to understand that a report about a cup of tea that I did not fully consume, made by a well-dressed, well-liked woman who owned several successful small businesses and had no prior criminal record, was not likely to produce an arrest. What it would produce was a warning. Patricia would know I knew. And a cornered person is an unpredictable person. I had a pregnancy to protect. I had myself to protect, so I was patient. And I was methodical. And I was very careful. I began documenting everything. Dates. Times. Conversation. Observation. I noted every invitation from Patricia and how they were extended. I noted every time she referenced the pregnancy and what specifically she said. I consulted quietly with an attorney not about divorce. Not yet. But about documentation standards and what constituted legally admissible evidence. I made copies of the toxicology report and stored them in 3 separate locations. I told exactly 2 people outside of my attorney what was happening, my own mother and my closest friend. Both of them were frightened for me. My friend wanted me to go to the police immediately. My mother wanted me to leave. I understood their fear. And I did not leave. And I did not go to the police. Not yet. What I did was install a small audio recording device in the bag I brought to every family gathering. It was the size of a pen cap. It was perfectly legal in my state for personal protection purposes. And I began attending every event Patricia organized with the kind of attention I had previously reserved for medication interaction reviews. 3 weeks passed. Then 4. Patricia called on a Tuesday evening and invited us to a small dinner party she was hosting for a few close friends. She mentioned specifically that she would love for me to try a new soup recipe she had been working on. Something warming and nourishing for a pregnant woman in her first trimester. Her voice was warm. Her concern sounded genuine. I told her I would be delighted to come. I told Daniel I was not feeling well the morning of the dinner and asked if he would mind going without me. He was disappointed. He said his mother would be upset. I told him to give her my apologies. He went alone. I spent that evening at home making phone calls. And I was glad of every one of them. The following week, Patricia called again. Another invitation. This time a small family lunch. Just the 4 of us, Patricia, my sister-in-law, Daniel, and me. Casual, she said. No pressure. She just wanted to see us. I went to that one. I brought my bag with the recording device. I brought my own bottled water. I complimented Patricia's tablecloth, and I ate only the food that came from sealed packaging that I observed being opened. And I watched Patricia watch me with an expression she could not quite keep entirely neutral. It was at that lunch that I first heard her say out loud what she had never quite said directly before. She waited until Daniel stepped outside to take a phone call. She waited until my sister-in-law had gone to the kitchen to refill her glass. And then she looked at me across the table with those warm, practiced eyes, and she said that she hoped I was taking care of myself. She said that early pregnancies could be so fragile. She said that sometimes, no matter how much you want something, the body simply decides it is not ready. And there is nothing anyone can do about that. And the most important thing is not to get too attached too early. Because nature has its own timeline and its own wisdom. She said all of this with perfect, practiced tenderness. My recorder was running. I said thank you for her concern. I said I felt wonderful. I smiled. and I excused myself to use the restroom, where I stood alone for 30 seconds and reminded myself why patience was the most powerful tool I had. I had an OB appointment the following Thursday. My daughter was healthy. I found out the sex that morning. One of those sudden, unexpected joys that cut straight through everything, and I told my doctor privately, in the exam room, with the door closed, everything that I had been building a record of for the past several weeks. I showed her the toxicology report. I played her a brief portion of the recording. I watched her face change, in the way that faces change when something moves from theoretical to real in front of you. She made a referral to the hospital's patient advocate. She also, with my explicit permission, called a contact she had at the county health department. I left that appointment with my daughter's heartbeat on an audio recording in my phone and with the slow, unstoppable momentum of something official, beginning to move. What happened next moved faster than I expected, and in ways I had not fully anticipated. Patricia was visited at her home by 2 detectives 11 days after my OB appointment. I was not present. Danya was. He called me 20 minutes after they arrived. And his voice had a quality in it I had never heard before, a kind of fracturing, like something structural giving way. He said the police were there asking about tea. He said they were asking about something she had given me. He said his mother was crying and telling them it was a misunderstanding, and he did not understand what was happening. I told him, calmly and clearly, everything. I told him about the Sunday brunch. I told him about the color of the tea. I told him about the toxicology report. I told him about the recording at the family lunch, and what his mother had said to me while he was standing outside. I told him that I had been building documentation for 6 weeks because I had learned, through 3 years of small and consistent evidence, that coming to him first would not protect me. He was silent for a very long time. Then he said he needed to go. He did not come home that night. He did not come home the following night either. He stayed at a hotel. And I know this, because he told me. And I know he was telling the truth, because I had stopped being a woman who simply trusted and had become a woman who verified. I am not proud of the second part. I am also not sorry. Patricia was arrested 14 days later on charges related to the intentional adulteration of food consumed by a pregnant woman. The specific charges evolved over the weeks that followed as the investigation expanded and prosecutors reviewed everything I had compiled. My sister-in-law was interviewed multiple times. She had not participated directly, but she had known. She had known for weeks and she had said nothing to me. And I have chosen not to think about her very much, because thinking about her requires a generosity I have not yet found. Daniel came home eventually. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I had sat alone at midnight with a toxicology report and a silence so heavy it had physical weight, and he cried for a long time. He told me he was sorry. He said it many ways and in many configurations, and I listened to all of them. He was not performing. I know the difference between his performed emotions and his real ones. And this was real. He was a man sitting in the wreckage of the story he had told himself his entire life, finally able to see the rubble for what it was. I am not going to tell you that we stayed together and everything was fine, because that is not what happened. And I do not tell dishonest stories. What happened is that we tried. We tried with a therapist who was extraordinarily good and who helped Daniel begin to identify the ways that his mother's conditioning had shaped him in ways he had never once examined. We tried for 8 months. There were weeks that felt like progress. There were weeks that felt like trying to rebuild a house while it was still on fire. What I ultimately came to understand is that I could not be both the person Daniel needed to recover alongside and the person I needed to become in order to build the life I wanted for my daughter. Those two things occupied the same space. And that space was not big enough for both of us. We finalized the divorce when my daughter was 4 months old. The trust fund disbursement, the portion tied to the birth of a child, came through legally to both Daniel and me as joint recipients, and then was divided in the settlement. My share, combined with what my attorney described as a very favorable outcome, given the circumstances, I was enough to change the entire trajectory of what was possible for me. I did not feel victorious about the money. I felt relieved. As the way you feel when you realize you are going to be able to give your child things you were not sure you could give her. That is what the money meant to me. Not revenge. Not a score. Stability. Safety. The ability to build walls that kept the dangerous things out. I moved to a different city. I know that sounds dramatic. And I want to be honest, it was necessary and also extremely difficult. I left behind proximity to people I loved. Routines I had built over years. A life that had been mine, even when parts of it were damaging. Starting over at 29 with a 4-month-old daughter is not a montage. It is a series of very ordinary days that require an extraordinary amount of sustained effort. There are nights when the exhaustion is so complete, it feels like a physical object sitting on your chest. But there are also mornings. There are mornings when I wake up before my daughter does, and I stand in the kitchen of the apartment that is mine, only mine. In a building that Patricia has never walked into, and never will, and the light comes through the window at an angle that makes everything look genuinely possible. I make coffee. I hear my daughter beginning to stir on the monitor. I go to get her, and she looks up at me with an expression that has no cynicism in it. No caution. No performance. Just recognition and trust, and the particular joy of someone who does not yet know that the world contains people who look at a pregnant woman and see a problem to be eliminated. She will know. Eventually, I will tell her age appropriately and honestly. The way I intend to tell her everything. I will teach her to notice when something is slightly the wrong color. I will teach her that her instincts are data, and that data should be collected, stored, and referenced. I will teach her that walking away from a structure that is designed to harm you is not weakness or failure. It is the most precise and difficult act of self-preservation there is. Patricia is currently awaiting trial. I will not speculate about the outcome here. But I will tell you that my documentation was thorough, and that my attorney uses the word confident in a way that feels specific rather than reassuring. Daniel sends birthday cards. He sends holiday cards. He calls on our daughter's monthly milestones, and I put him on video so he can see her face. Because she deserves to know her father, and because his failure to protect us, while real and consequential, did not make him a predator. He is a man working very hard to become someone he should have started becoming a long time ago. That is not my project anymore. But I do not wish him harm. I wish him clarity. Because clarity is a kinder gift than forgiveness, and ultimately more useful. My sister-in-law has reached out twice. I have not responded. That is not a permanent decision. It is a current one. And current decisions are allowed to be current without being forever. What I want to leave you with is not a triumph. I do not experience my life as a triumph. I experience it as a life that is genuinely mine, shaped by choices I made with full information, at real cost, over a period of sustained effort and occasional grief. The cost was real. The grief is sometimes still real. But the life is real too. The light in the kitchen is real. The weight of my daughter in my arms when I lift her in the morning is real. The silence of an apartment where no one is watching me and cataloging what I drink is a silence I will never take for granted. I think about the woman who sat at Patricia's table, holding a cup of tea she did not drink. And I feel something for her that is not quite pity and not quite pride. Something more like recognition. She noticed what she needed to notice. She was patient when patience was what the situation required. She protected herself and her daughter before anyone else had decided to do it. And she did it quietly and methodically, and without waiting for someone to tell her, she was allowed to. You do not have to wait for someone to tell you that you are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed. You have always been allowed. If you are sitting somewhere right now, and something feels slightly the wrong color, trust that. Document it. Build your record. Find one person outside of the situation you can trust completely, and tell them everything. You do not have to blow up your life in a single afternoon to save it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is the thing that looks from the outside like nothing at all. I am standing in my kitchen with my daughter on my hip, watching the city move outside the window. And I am telling you this because the woman who held that cup and said nothing and drove home and labeled a small container with the date and time and a name, that woman made every single good thing in this room possible. She is the reason I am here. She is the reason my daughter is here. Never underestimate someone who knows precisely what she is looking at. If this story reached something in you, please hit like and subscribe to Recovery Stories for more stories of resilience and rebuilding. I read your comments. You are not alone in what you are carrying. Now tell me, have you ever had to trust your instincts when everyone around you was telling you that you were wrong? Let me know below.